Good afternoon. I'm Karen Merrill, LCSW and RBH consultant, and I have the pleasure of presenting today's Lunch and Learn topic, connecting in today's workplace, giving and receiving feedback. So in the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to look at this topic, the importance of giving and receiving feedback, learn to evaluate communication with objectivity, focus on facts and not get sidetracked by feelings, to communicate clearly while still listening, concentrate on using feedback to make improvements, and maintain mutual respect, even when we differ in opinions and perspectives. As is our practice, we'll insert polling questions throughout the presentation and hopefully have a little time at the end for Q&A. I'm pleased that Brenda Allen, our administrative coordinator, is with me and will be managing the interactive processes. Okay. So why change things now? Why not just leave them as they are? Giving feedback to someone's hard, particularly depending on what our personality style is. And our natural desire is to be liked and to actually like others. So rocking the boat and having a confrontive conversation risks dealing with the reactions of others, and it can take us out of our comfort zone. So why do we think that this is something we need to look at now? So think about, on an individual basis, what's going on? What is your history with giving and receiving feedback? Kind of make a short mental note of how that's gone in the past. Think about what challenges you've faced when giving and receiving feedback. What experiences have you had giving and receiving feedback, both at home and at work? What associations do you have? Did it go well? Were difficulties resolved? How about now? Is giving and receiving feedback part of your current work environment? We call this the WRAP strategy. And we ask you to consider this. And during this presentation, listen for strategies you can use to implement a change in behavior. We review the past, kind of what has that been like for us in terms of feedback conversations, look at the present, and plan for the future. You know, after 2 weeks of trying to start a new behavior or actually stopping behavior, we plant the seeds of getting that to become routine, but it takes about 21 days to really get that seeded and where it becomes a habit. So we don't need to think that we can change overnight, but we give ourselves patience with this, as in anything we're going to change. So some key questions. Why is it important in your job to be able to give and receive feedback? How well do you think you give it now? And how well do you think you receive it? So we're going to start with our first polling question next. Currently, what is more of a challenge for you? Giving constructive feedback or receiving constructive feedback? So the polls are open, and Brenda will give you a few minutes, and then Brenda will tally it up.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I just closed our poll here, and it looks like we have the majority of people, 73% voting for A, giving constructive feedback, and 29% voting for B, receiving constructive feedback.
Okay, so that's good to know. And also, just so you know, kind of the presentation supports that, because the majority of our slides have to do with giving constructive feedback, and then the probably a third or so on receiving. So it just about lines up with how we experience it. So good to know, and then it gives me an idea of kind of what your thinking is. What this means is that it just kind of recognizes the difficulty and the potential emotional charged environment when we're going to give feedback. So stay calm and professional, meaning use all the tools in your toolbox to help you stay centered. In other words, deep breathing, self-talk, and to check your emotions, taking the pulse on your own emotional state and the emotional state of the person that you're addressing is very important, because it makes you more present and really get an idea of what your conversation is matching the situation that you're dealing with. Try to turn a negative into an opportunity. Use your skills to open communication. Very important, as we know in all communication, to start with an I statement. For example, you might be in a situation where you wanted to give some feedback to someone on project X, and you might say, is this a good time? If for the listener, it is not a good time, then ask for a counter suggestion. Try to nail down a date and time before closing the conversation, so that neither you or that person lose sight of it. We want to make sure that we're able to continue towards completion rather than getting sidetracked. Okay. In giving feedback, before ever setting the agenda for a meeting, think through what issue you want to address. What do you want to leave them with? What do you want to communicate? What is your role in the conversation? Are you in a supervisory capacity, a team lead, a colleague? How does all this impact communication? So you want to think through what you want to say, how you want to say it, and what might even help you to say it better. So some communication facts as an aside. Studies have found that people who talk assertively and more fluently are more persuasive. Using a deeper voice, a steady, deeper voice, shows that those people have more credibility. We all are familiar with what we call, powerless styles of communication, lots of pauses, ums, ahs, and what we call tag questions lowers perceptions of credibility. So what's a tag question? A tag question really is a statement followed by a mini question. For example, that was helpful, right? Or he could have approached that differently. Don't you agree? So you're really asking for confirmation. And in part, you're making a conclusion for somebody else. So tag questions are not helpful in effective forms of communication. So next, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Listen clearly for both a spoken and an unspoken message. These actually are really useful tools in both giving and receiving feedback. But when you're delivering, you need to be mindful of others' reactions, their perceptions, watch body language, make sure you understand by asking clarifying questions. Oftentimes when we begin a conversation with someone, particularly when it's something that is giving feedback, we listen for some key themes and then we stop listening and start formulating our response in our head. So we say oftentimes that people are too busy formulating their defense to hear what you just said. So making sure you're understood by asking clarifying questions can be really helpful. Okay. Components of assertive communication: being direct, being honest, being clear, straightforward, proactive. And I think one other thing that's important to mention is respectful. I mean, we're all different in terms of how we perceive things and how we read things. So being able to honor that is very important. But these are key points of assertive communication that takes practice and skill. All right, we're going to go into polling question 2. From what you know or what you've read, what percentage of communication is nonverbal? Is it 75%, 45, 25, or 65? So we're going to give you a minute and see how you think about that.
Okay, I've just closed polling question 2, and the majority of participants voted for A. That's 70% voted for A, and 21% voted for D. 8% voted for B, and 1% voted C.
For D. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Go ahead. What were you going to say, Brenda?
Oh, nothing. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So, it used to be that it was 75%. I mean, that's what all this, data was. And now it is that it's 65%, which is certainly still far more than half, and an indicator that the power in communication is not in the words that we say, but how we say it and the nonverbals associated with that. So moving on to the 5 types of nonverbal communication is pretty interesting, actually. Our face is capable of conveying more than 250,000 expressions. So we can, not say a word at all and convey lots of messages by our facial expressions. We know that smiling increases connection, likability, credibility, opens up communication. People are more likely to become engaged and even comply when more direct eye contact is used. It conveys a sense of sincerity, looking somebody directly in the eye, and it establishes a connection between people. Body language tells it all. Body language in terms of whether our arms are crossed or where there's a close proximity with somebody else, or our facial expression. it all. So we were talking about body language and how the gestures give messages themselves, and then physical appearance. We may like it or not like it, but the fact is that physical appearance does affect how we communicate. So, neater, cleaner conveys more positive impression. So when we think that more than 65% of communication is nonverbal, it seriously affects the emotions of a conversation. So moving to the next slide. So we indicated how important body language is using I statements. I statements convey ownership and not accusation. We're saying what we believe or what we own. Facts, not judgment, helps keep conversations on track. If the person that you're addressing in terms of giving feedback is uncomfortable with confrontation, or if in fact, they think they may have done some things wrong, they may try to divert the conversation and sidetrack it. So our job in giving feedback is to keep that conversation on track. So the next slide, getting ready for that conversation, preparing. If we've had a bad morning at home or at work, it's going to challenge us to kind of stay centered. So making adjustments in that regard, and checking our own emotions. We think about, kind of building blocks. When our own emotions are in check, we're a lot more careful with the words we choose and our ability to stay centered instead of getting triggered. So we want to relate using positive nonverbal communication, giving the message of being open, smiling, genuine. As we know, if we're overly emotional, either the listener or the speaker, it can sidetrack a conversation and obscure the message that we're looking at. Be aware of your stress in yourself and others. I know we say this repeatedly, but it's very important, like in all forms of communication. Try to reconcile any disagreements if it's possible. If not, then that might need to be tabled to be able to address the issue at hand and giving the direct feedback for that conversation. So knowing how important the nonverbals are, it affects the emotions that we're delivering in that conversation. We talk about this really in any communications training or tips, but avoiding words like you, don't, won't, or can't. These are absolute closed-ended, judgmental kinds of words. They're phrases that put others on the defensive, and instead of hearing your message, they can become triggered emotionally and think only of their explanation. Instead, using phrases that stick to the facts and reference specific situations are much more effective. Avoid words like always, never, worse. It's really, when you think about it, most things have exceptions, and what you're wanting to do is convey a message to someone that there are exceptions. You're not trying to put them or their behavior in a box. So an alternative to you always do it that way, or using those closed-ended words, ask if current behaviors are effective. Ask if what has currently been occurring is effective and has been working, or are there other ways that might be thought of to approach a problem? Cite specifics in respectful ways. For example, on May 26th, X occurred. On July 2nd, this occurred. Would there be another way to look at it or approach it? So when we do that, we're collaborating, and we're also being very factual. And it's hard to argue with evidence. You know, we can argue or debate emotions all day long, but facts hopefully are facts, and that can be something that keeps things on track in terms of citing ways to make changes. So we're going to skip the polling question. What I might say, just in terms of, we won't open it up, but in fact, taking a log that you've managed to a meeting can be very helpful. It might make someone on the other side of the desk from you or alongside you think, oh, they've got some information here. So we're going to be looking at actually what's happened. But it's not poor form at all. It's very helpful in moving things forward. Being respectful, again, honoring that we can all see things differently, doesn't mean that one is necessarily better than the other. We're trying to solve problems in the workplace and in terms of how things are communicated. So other body cues, a gesture with the arms crossed over the chest can certainly, I've got a shield in front of me. It's a defensive kind of gesture. Walking with our hands in our pockets, our shoulders hunched, can mean dejection. A hand to our cheek can mean that we're thinking or evaluating. This next one was something I wasn't aware of, this interpretation, but what the research says is touching or slightly rubbing one's nose can indicate doubt, lying, or rejection. Could be kind of a giveaway for that. Rubbing one's eyes can mean doubt and disbelief, and hands clapped behind the back can be an indication of frustration. So all information about how we manage ourselves and present ourselves in the most open kind of way. Now, what this doesn't affect is if you're doing this communication by email or telephonically or online. So we have to be careful about how we open up that kind of communication as well. So body mirroring. Mirroring is very powerful. It builds rapport with others by mimicking their nonverbal cues. It's used by hostage negotiators, mediators. We're attracted to those who are similar to us or equal. So it facilitates a body language being more receptive to you. Self-help books suggest it. Now, what if you're communicating with somebody who has got their arms clasped in front of them, or are doing these other indicators of closed kind of communication? Start with where they are. Put your hands in front of your chest and then open them up and watch if that doesn't happen on the other side. If they're reluctant to make eye contact, first maybe not make it quite so direct and then move towards that. So kind of start where they are and shape their behavior towards a more open communication. So this section is really important, particularly when we get to this 3-1-1 formula. So we're going to spend a few minutes here. But being sincere mindful of our tone of voice in a non-threatening tone, speaking slowly, pausing to emphasize key words, not to interrupt the message, but to emphasize key words, and offer praise if applicable. We look at this, what we call a 3-1-1 formula. So you may be familiar with John Gottman, who's a psychologist who's done a lot of work with couples, but he and another psychologist named Dr. Fredrickson, and organizational psychologists as well, have proven that a ratio of at least 3 positive experiences to 1 negative statement is necessary to successfully create a relationship in our personal and business lives. And in addition, Dr. Carol Dweck shows in her research that the language and even the mindset we bring into that conversation is important. So, and can affect outcomes. So John Gottman talks about deposits that we put into an emotional bank account. And every time you have a positive interaction with someone, that goes into this emotional kind of bank account. So if there are 3 or more of those and 1 negative incident occurs, that person doesn't dwell on the fact that you may have called your attention to that, because there's a lot of groundwork in a positive relationship. Now it goes the other way too. So it's very important to have these kind of deposits, and that criticism and contempt are not contaminating that. So think about the last time you're criticized. You may have done many things well, but the speaker chose to pick on the one area where you made the mistake and ignored all the good actions that you've accomplished. It may make you feel attacked, as if that person weren't seeing the whole you, just the mistakes. So this is why we talk about this 3-1-1 format. And to move forward with that, let's say you're having a confrontive conversation with someone and you cite 3 positive past occurrences that you can compliment. So you're setting kind of the stage, a positive arena. Then you might say 1 area that I feel like could be improved, and then you're very specifically stating what those are. Most important to demonstrate what you mean, whether it is the structure of a behavior, whether it was the tone of voice or the body language. You give very specific examples of what you're wanting changed. And then, to kind of couch language in a friendly way, you might use words like, I feel that a more workable alternative might be, or what might be a more workable alternative, rather than saying to someone, you should do it this way. Once we do that, then somebody is more likely to get on the defensive. Then you close it with the thing I like most. So you have an opportunity to leave the person with something they did really well. Again, the more specific your feedback, the more motivational and useful it is. So this kind of formula makes it easier to hear feedback and take action. It's kind of like you're sandwiching not exactly a criticism, but improvement language between 2 positive pieces. And one issue at a time sets up a friendlier environment. And this is true in relationship with your children or your partners, as well as in the workplace. So we'll skip that next polling question and then just move on to more tips to effective feedback. Pose questions. If you ask inquiries, people are more likely to share information. You'll learn more. It will be a discovery process for them. You know, when we hear ourselves say something, it holds a lot more powerful meaning than when we're thinking of it. And it enriches our self-knowledge. So be collaborative and ask questions as you're having this conversation. Have your intentions of giving feedback be good intentions. So be mindful that what you're doing is not proving that you're right, or assigning blame, or demonstrating your authority. This is particularly tricky when you're in a supervisory role because of the power structure, inherent power structure in that relationship. So when we want to give feedback is to help fix, resolve, or handle a problem. And we talked about ways of shaping language to do that. To initiate a positive, proactive change. Maybe it's not in response to something specific, but to initiate a proactive change. And what we're really wanting, we want everybody to be able to do a better job. So we can give feedback to coach someone to do a better job as well. So receiving feedback, how are we doing? What's it like to be on the other side of this desk? How do we react ourselves with verbal and nonverbal messages? So using mindfulness and emotional intelligence skills can help us manage our own reaction, but being watchful that we're not sighing ourselves or rolling our eyes or have our arms folded in front of us are all indicators of being reactive ourselves when we're receiving feedback. So this acronym, SOLAR, so the S, square up face to face with the person, not in a dominant kind of way, but where you're making eye contact and engaging the other. Open your posture to the person. Make sure that you give the message that you're welcoming what feedback you're getting. Even leaning toward the person can be helpful. Eye contact in a smiling kind of way. Being as natural and relaxed as you can in that setting. So we learn about ourselves when others give us feedback. It's an opportunity, really, to improve our attitude, improve our relationship. It gives us an idea about how vulnerable we are. We can feel like we have very definite ideas and know pretty much what's right and are able to give feedback to others. But how do others see us is just as important a part of feedback. So receiving feedback is a two-step process. Listen without judging the speaker, so you can fully understand the message that is being conveyed to you. Realistically evaluate what was said. Decide if it's valid to you. Even if it isn't, and if you've got that justification on the tip of your tongue, acknowledge this is how they see it. It's their point of view. Kind of watching kind of the messages that go on in our head are very important when listening to feedback. We're we can automatically, kind of get on our defensive mode and want to explain or describe. And really, that's not necessarily the point at hand. The point at hand is how we're taking the feedback and how we move forward from that. So next slide, in terms of focusing on the feedback. Ask yourself these questions. What kernels of truth may be here in what I'm hearing? Have I heard similar feedback in the past? What specific steps can I take to address the issue? You're wondering if I'm perceived as less effective because of this feedback and how that feels. Receiving feedback much more gets to our ego, certainly, than in giving feedback. And honestly, looking at what obstacles there might be in making some changes in the way we communicate ourselves. Take feedback effectively. Take it as effectively as you would give it. I don't know if you've ever heard of the 80-20 rule. It's hard for people to kind of sit back and listen, but if we listen 80% of the time and speak only 20% of the time, we can be much more respectful and effective in receiving feedback. So the 80-20 rule is very important. I mentioned at the beginning of the training that a lot of people spend their time rehearsing their response or their defense rather than listening. So we try not to be that person. We try to be the person who practices listening more than talking. It challenges us to not think defensively. So if we're going to continue with the polling questions, I would just ask what of these suggestions you might consider in this next week or so, whether it would be making your communication style more effective in giving feedback, receiving it, tuning in to your own areas of defensiveness, or practice the listening 80% and talking 20. Communication style and skills are a process. Takes practice, and I always say that there's always another opportunity to make improvements in how we're understood and how we receive feedback. So we've looked at evaluating and focusing more on facts, how to communicate clearly and listen to each other, concentrating on feedback, all while acknowledging that we're different and maintaining mutual respect in terms of putting the pieces together. So remember that the EAP is always there for you in terms of someone on the phone at that moment if you feel like the need, or in terms of scheduling appointments to visit with counselors on a specific targeted issue. It's there as a tool to help you move through challenges that we all face. So Brenda, do you think there's a way to risk questions, or shall we ask that they funnel them to you and then you funnel them to me, or what do you think?
I think we could try the question panel.
Okay.
Yeah. If you don't have to launch anything, you just might not have the same issue with polling questions.
Okay, and then you can just tell me what they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I don't see that we have any questions coming in, and people can certainly email questions following the webinar, and we will be sending a copy of the PowerPoint along with the link to the archived presentation from the RBH YouTube channel.
Oh, great. Yeah. You know, I know that your time is valuable. You're taking your lunch and a kind of a break from your busy schedule. So we appreciate the fact that you bared with us through this time and hope that you found some new or some reminders of information that can be helpful and useful. Thank you all for your time today. And if there's no questions, we'll close.